Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about Harlem Renaissance. The movement for Black poet found its cultural expression in the Harlem Renaissance, the first self-conscious literature and artist movement in African American history. The black people and the black writer wanted to start this Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance was an unprecedented period of literature, musical, and artist production among African Americans that reached its peak in 1920s. Southern blacks in particular were feeling poverty and hoping to find more economic and personal freedom in the North. During the 1920s, Harlem became the capital of Black America, attracting black intellectuals and artists from across the country and the Columbia. The Harlem Renaissance influenced the future generation of black writers, but it was largely ignored by the literature establishment after it wanted in the 1930s. With the advent of the civil rights movement, it again acquired wide recognition. Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about Harlem Renaissance. The movement for Black poet found its cultural expression.
Artistic movements and connections. The 1920s had an outburst of creativity among African Americans in every aspect of art. The cultural movement became known as the New Negro Movement, later the Harlem Renaissance. Harlem attracted a prosperous and stylish middle class, which sprouted an artistic center. African Americans were encouraged to celebrate their heritage and to become the new Negro, as the term was coined. Some of the most famous artists were Aaron Douglas, Lois Jones, and Jacob Lawrence, to name a few. Aaron Douglas was a Harlem Renaissance artist whose work best exemplified the New Negro philosophy. He painted murals for public buildings and illustrations and cover designs for many black publications, including The Crisis and Opportunity. Lois Jones was an innovator whom attended the School of Museum of Fine Art in Boston, which was during a time of strong racism to African Americans. She used to enter her works into exhibitions that did not recognize African American artists, so she'd have her white friends deliver the paintings to display, which they did. Jacob Lawrence was the first mainstream African American artist. His success began at the age of 24 and was sustained until he died in 2000. Lawrence was best known for his Migration series, where he showed the migration of blacks from Africa to the U.S. He mainly focused on the life of the blacks
Comparing
in the
artistic
South.
movements and literary movements is quite easy. The literary movements were very depressing and dark. They focused on lost love and something that's almost unattainable. They never focused on something that was happy or anything good in society, which was hard to find at that time. And the artistic movements as well. They focused, especially the Harlem paintings, they focused on the discrimination and slave side of the African American's life.
The Lost Generation generally refers to the post-World War I generation as a whole, but more specifically to a group of American writers who established themselves in Paris during the 1920s. This includes Hemingway, Fitzgerald, and E. E. Cummings, and many others who spent a lot of time in the French capital. The term itself originates from a comment made by Gertrude Stein, an American writer, poet, and art collector who lived in France, to Ernest Hemingway. Hemingway popularized the term after he used it as an epigraph to his book, The Sun Also Rises, which captures the life of delusionized youth wounded, both physically and mentally, by the war in Paris. The generation was lost that their inherited values were no longer relevant in a materialistic society. The period before the war had been influenced by optimism and progressivism, which came to a halt with the brutality of the war. Many people started to question an industrialized society that lacked an emphasis on moral values. Paris was the cultural hub as it was very tolerant of literature that confronted established morals. Many young writers such as Hemingway published some of their most powerful and controversial works in the city. This generation of writers wanted freedom of thought and action, which had been taken away during the war. They criticized the increased focus on materialism and contributed to a modern society by encouraging tolerance and understanding. Therefore, there was room for movements such as the Harlem Renaissance. As a result, the Roaring Twenties was not only a time for disowning values, but also creating new ones.
A few of the Lost Generation contributors, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, and E. E. Cummings, John Dos Passos, and Archambault. Many of the writers during this time period wrote about the corruptness and what was happening to a group of people in society. The Lost Generation was formed from what was going on in the world and the result of the war. The Lost Generation was created because after World War I was over, all of the people did not have any morals, which meant that they were very selfish and only cared about materialistic things. Not only this, people started dressing risque, and there was flappers and other new lifestyles that women and men had. F. Scott Fitzgerald was a leader in the social society. His highest point in his career was during the 1920s and 1930s, and after that, his life went downhill. The last piece of work we are left with by Fitzgerald dealing with the Lost Generation is Tender in the Night. Other writers that were part of the Lost Generation write about being lost or trying to find themselves because they feel that way after the war. It has also been said that Fitzgerald became an alcoholic after the 1930s and the height of his career. Importance of F. Scott Fitzgerald. F. Scott Fitzgerald was an important author from the Lost Generation and is one of the most well-known. His work is loosely about that generation and how they are lost because their morals are not important like the other generations before them. A quote that he has said is, "My idea is always to reach my generation. The wise writer writes for the youth of his own generation, the critics of the next, and the schoolmasters of ever afterward."